So we don't get a lot of stories about Jesus' youth, and just a note on it is I find this sometimes a little bit funny because the story of a parent getting really worried about, an almost teenager and getting them in trouble for it, and then the teenager saying, you shouldn't be worried, and I'm not understood by you. That's a pretty common theme I've found in life. I've had a few discussions like that with my parents when I was a teenager, and seeing kind of a teen angsty Jesus is just always kind of fun. I actually don't think Jesus was really angsty at his parents, but it's just fun to see him in a different light than we usually see. On a face level, this is a pretty simple story about being lost and being found, but I really think that there's a lot more to it that is directly related to this time. And that's why I think it was placed in the lectionary, which is the schedule we have of scriptures that gets read out each week for the Sunday right after Christmas. This comes up once every 3 years, and I think it really means something to us, and we'll get into that in a moment. But first, I just want to go through the story. So Mary and Joseph, they're really good parents, right? They're pretty famously really good parents, and they go to a festival in Jerusalem, and they have to travel a really long ways. They're probably very busy. Things get really chaotic traveling. They go through all their religious obligations, and then it's time to pack up and go back to Nazareth. You can imagine that they were probably so busy that in all that busyness, they just didn't take the time to confirm that Jesus was in their travel party home, and they kind of just lost track of him. Now again, these were good people. They were great parents, and they were naturally mortified. So they searched high and low among the travel party and in the probably road between where they were in Jerusalem. And then they went back to the big city, to Jerusalem, and looked everywhere for him. They looked for 3 days for Jesus. They didn't give up, but they also didn't look in probably the most obvious place you could look, which was the temple. So finally, they find Jesus, and they confront him. Jesus is in big trouble. He left his parents to their own devices when they were traveling to Nazareth. He's only 12 years old. They were worried sick. Jesus, how could you do this to us? They're saying, we were full of anxiety. I can't believe that you did this. And Jesus just looks at him and basically says, you should have known that I would be here. Why were you searching for me? And when we look at the story, Jesus didn't do anything to his parents. Jesus didn't leave Mary and Joseph behind. Mary and Joseph were the one who walked away. They were the ones who kind of created that distance between themselves and Jesus. Maybe because they just got a little wrapped up in things. They got really busy. And the nice thing about the story, which I just love, these kinds of themes come up throughout the gospel so much, is this doesn't end with Jesus asking for new parents because his parents left him behind in Jerusalem all by himself as a 12-year-old. But it just ends with him knowing that they don't quite get it yet, going off with them and being a really good son and talking about how Mary just treasured him in her heart. Mary and Joseph lost track of Jesus, but he didn't go anywhere. And in today's world, we've just experienced Advent and Christmas, all the lights and hopes and excitement and possibilities that come with it. It is a time where we feel like magic is in the air, where anything could happen, where we marvel at the beauty of the lights, and we go through our holiday traditions with music and trees and all kinds of goodies and decorations. And during that time, we are busy people getting ready for Christmas to come, and it comes and goes, and then suddenly we're also busy people because we change gears to the new year, and now it's time to clean up the house, to start eating healthier, hopefully, to go and take down all of the decorations, to start putting on different music, and to start thinking about what kind of resolutions we're going to do for the new year that we can do to make ourselves better. And if we're not careful in all that busyness that goes with moving on from the Christmas holiday, when we put the lights and the ornaments and the tree away in the box, we might just put away the hope, the excitement, and the feeling that anything is possible with Christ being born into this world until next year. We might just put that in the box with all the decorations as well. So like Mary and Joseph, it is very common for us to lose track of Jesus in all of the busyness of life. And it's kind of tidier that way too. I mean, we like order, we like knowing where things go, and we like to know when to expect things will happen. So having a time of wonder and possibilities for 1 month out of the year, that is a great place that we can just know it's there and then move on to the normality of life. The problem is, Jesus just doesn't really fit well into one of those boxes. He's just so different than anything we know. He never stops pouring out his love and his grace into our world and into our hearts. He never stops challenging us. He never shrinks away from us. Even when we go away from him, he never stops the work of transforming us. It's always us who lose track of him. It's not the other way around. I have to tell you about a time when I went to Bethlehem. I was on a long trip, and there was something that struck me so much about Bethlehem, and that's just how kind of normal of a place Bethlehem is. It's not a gilded city on a hill. There's nothing super extraordinary about it. There's actually a KFC in Bethlehem. It's like right down the street from the Church of the Nativity. It's located, no joke, on Manger Street in Bethlehem. There is a KFC. I looked it up on Google. That has decent Google reviews. There's sometimes a long wait, but that's about the only problem with it. The Church of the Nativity is the place where we feel it marks the spot where Jesus was born. It's a church that's on top of a cave, and we wouldn't have seen big buildings in Bethlehem in the time of Jesus' birth. They actually would have just been hanging out in caves in a hillside, and the animals would have been kept in the back of a cave because that's where the air's not so good and it kind of doesn't smell so good. The people would be near the front of the cave. So when we're talking about Jesus being born in a manger near the animals, it doesn't mean he was in a freestanding barn with a lot of space. He was just in a little nook in the back of a cave. It's amazing when I looked at those things and I just noticed it's not all that different of terrain from the area I grew up at. Like, the dirt's not completely different than it is here in Franklin, Tennessee. The people are just as human as they are here in Franklin, Tennessee, and everywhere else in the world. It is as unassuming of a place as you could possibly imagine. Bethlehem was not selected as Jesus' birthplace because it was this extraordinary place that is gilded and bright, filled with lights. I think it was selected just because it was as normal of a place as you could possibly imagine. So it's not the bright lights and pageantry of Christmas that bring hope and joy and wonder. It's Christ being born into the world. It wasn't the grandeur of Bethlehem that made it special and that still makes it special. It's just Jesus who makes it special. And that's what Jesus does. Jesus can make the most unassuming places, the most unassuming people, and the most unassuming times into the most spectacular moments, people, and places that we record in history. I want to tell you about a time that was pretty unassuming in my life when I found Jesus to be born again in me. The first time I can remember leaving Jesus behind and finding a distance between myself and Jesus was when I went to college. So I grew up in a very structured and wonderful faith environment. I was at youth group every Sunday. I was at church youth choir every Wednesday. We sang in church every Sunday. There was great fellowship. It was a huge part of my life. Faith was a huge part of my life. And then suddenly I went off to college and I had no structure. I made a ton of new friends. I was living a very different life than I was in high school. And I just thought to myself, maybe my life of faith doesn't fit so tidily into what I'm doing with my life right now. So I try to kind of put it into a box and store it off for a time and place where maybe that was more appropriate. And it wasn't about the group of people I was hanging out with or the atmosphere I was in. A lot of my friends went to church every Sunday. It was just me creating a distance between myself and Jesus Christ, a distance between myself and my faith life, just because it wasn't super convenient for me in my mind at that time. Well, as I started going through my first few years of college, I really missed my faith life. I missed the strength and the hope that it gave to me. I missed that place to turn to when things weren't going really well. And I started kind of wondering why Jesus was so far away from me. And I was kind of feeling abandoned. And when I would go home back to California from Ohio to visit for Thanksgiving and Christmas, I would go to church, and I'd feel really out of place there because I was so far away from my faith, and these people knew me at the time when I was close to it. And I felt like an imposter in my own home place of worship. I just didn't fit in, and I was starting to get a little bit upset with Christ from being so far from me. This kind of changed when I was, by school requirement, forced to take a theology class. I went to a Catholic school, and that was part of the general education requirement to get my degree. And there was one class that I could take in my junior year of college that I had time in my schedule for, and I wasn't super happy about it because this was at 6 p.m. on Thursday nights, and for a college student, at least for me, that was the weekend. Like, that was not a time when I wanted to be sitting in a classroom. And the class was called Mystery of Christ, and it was with this professor, Judith Muthing, and all we did in the class was just go through the story of Jesus in the Bible, and gosh, she talked so eloquently about it. And I read more of the words written in red than I ever had just in one sitting each week, and I just started falling in love with this Jesus and this story and the passion that he had in his ministry with us. And I felt this kind of yearning to come back to faith growing within me, but I still was feeling kind of ashamed that I had left it all behind, and I didn't really know where I could find it again. And there was one night where Professor Muthing was talking about how we can grab our faith and how easy it is, and how sometimes she's just frustrated by how complicated we make it. And she looked around, and somehow she just caught my eye, and she said, "If there's a distance between you and God, who do you think moved?" And I thought to myself, it was me, wasn't it? And Christ was born anew into my life that day. It was at an old classroom in Cincinnati, Ohio that needed renovations on a kind of cold November day. It wasn't in Advent or any other super special time of year, but it was one of the most special days of my life. And I've lost track of Jesus plenty of times since then. I get busy. I try and start doing things on my own. Sometimes living my faith life isn't always that convenient, and I kind of box it away. And every time I lose track of Jesus, I just think back to Professor Muthing, and I think of the story from the Gospel of Luke, and I think of Jesus saying to me, "Why were you searching for me? Did you not know that I'm right where I was when you found me in the classroom in Ohio? Don't you know that I want to be by your side always? Remember who you are and come be that person with me again." You see, Jesus doesn't need lights or carols or cakes or presents to transform the world. All he needs is open hearts. We can see that because Jesus wasn't born around a bunch of lights and trees and presents. He was born in the back of a smelly cave down the road from a KFC. Anywhere, anytime, God's grace is offered to you. Anywhere, anytime, Christ can be born anew within you. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. Amen.